I think many people who are just embarking on their own businesses or their own startups perhaps, or involved in small businesses, will find the people piece a real challenge and getting that right a real challenge. So how do you go about making sure you've got not just the right skill set where people are required, but also the right team?
Yes, that's a really interesting question, because you're absolutely what I think you're getting at. It's not always about the hard skills, and I'm sure you see this in sport as well. It's about how those teams come together. You can have, I've worked with people who had very high IQ, but were not so high on the EQ. And that can work in a certain environment. So in investment, there are certain roles where it's actually where you kind of need someone who's particularly focused on one thing. But when it comes to a team environment, you need a balance of those skills. You need the IQ, but you also need the EQ. And if you see that there's a shortage, you either need to replace the team members or think about it differently. And you obviously always need to give feedback first. Many people, I'm sure, have said this on this podcast in different ways, but feedback is a gift. I think both the giving as well as the receiving, by the way. I think as a leader, it's hugely important to receive feedback, because we don't have the answers to everything either, and you need to listen to your team. But you also need to give your team members a chance to adjust. So feedback, how you give it is important. The environment you construct so that team members can perform to the best of their abilities is also really critical. And sometimes it also comes working from working with the team and making sure that everybody understands that people bring something different and special to the table, and that there isn't always one way of solving things, which is the whole point of a team. In football, what you look for in a goalie is very different from what you look for in your attacker, and you wouldn't swap them in your team. And that's similar in the business world too.
And when things do go wrong, is it more that the world around you, you're having to react and you're having to overcome adversity in that regard, and how you deal with that from the position in which you hold? Or is there a scenario whereby within the organization something may have got overlooked, or something there may need to be a redress? How do you overcome those particular challenges and those particular problems?
So look, not everything works out. And I learned that early on in my career, when I was an investor. And to me, what was always really critical is once a year we would have an offsite and we would do case studies on investment decisions that had not worked out. It's quite easy to talk about the things that do work out, but it's from your failures that you learn the most. And, there were occasions where we would say, knowing what we know today, we probably still would have made the same decision or 3 years earlier. But sometimes you find that there's a flaw in your process and your way of thinking. So it's about learning from your failures. That's really critical. I think and I've always taken that forward. I think as a consequence, it's also really critical that you create an environment where people feel it's okay to fail at something sometimes, because it's about the learning environment. And secondly, that they come and talk to you when something isn't working out, because otherwise we can't help. You can't sort of help to address the particular situation. So also creating that safe space and that learning environment, I think, is hugely critical. And the way I have found I can create it by owning up to my own mistakes, right? So there will be moments. As a leader, I very much believe in listening to views around the table, broadly trying to get to consensus, but there are situations where perhaps the teams are split, and I have to, you get to a point where you realize, well, I'm going to have to take this decision. And I'm generally very clear in those moments as to what that I'm comfortable with taking the decision. I will articulate it. I will, my way of saying it would be like, okay, I know some of you want to go left and some of you want to go right. I'm actually going straight, or whatever the decision is. But I will be very clear it's my decision. And if it doesn't work out, I will also come back to the team and say, I'm aware I took this decision 6 months ago and it hasn't worked out. Let's talk about it so that next time, we all learn from this, and perhaps I should have, put more weight on what the people on the left side of the table were saying than the right side, or whatever it is. And I think by showing your own vulnerability and that you make mistakes as well, I think it helps to create an environment where people are comfortable coming to you as a leader to share when things don't work out.
Absolutely. In terms of one of the things we talk about a lot on this podcast is within sport is one of the beauties of sport is it has this sort of element of surprise. There's always the possibility that you might not be able to predict what's going to happen next. In your world, have you had those moments? Have you been taken by surprise? Are you or have you in fact surprised yourself by something that may have happened and how you've reacted to it?
Yeah, look, when you are involved in the world of investing, you're always on the lookout for surprises and events that, as we say, are low probability but sort of high impact. But of course, the challenge with that is you can't predict when they happen and how they happen and how deep the impact is going to be. So you tend to be in an environment, and I think that's true in sports as well, where there's generally a lot of unpredictability, but there's normal unpredictability. And then there are moments when, and then there are moments when things really are at risk of falling off a cliff. So in financial terms, it was, of course, often we talk about the global financial crisis. There was a moment of, oh my goodness, what is happening to our at the time, at the situation I was in, what's happening to our portfolios? What can we do? How can we ensure that we still deliver performance to our clients? And actually, the situation I was in at the time, we managed to turn it into an opportunity and acquire assets at relatively low prices, which really helped with the overall performance. 2022, where I would say there were two events that really impacted markets, one, or really three. One was, of course, the start of the war in Ukraine, which was very unsettling. Secondly was the interest rate environment and how quickly the central banks would increase interest rates. And that perhaps went a bit quicker than some had anticipated. And then thirdly, specifically to the UK, we had the mini budget crisis, which really impacted the value of gilts in ways that we had not seen before and clearly created considerable moments of stress in the business. But it's then how you come together as a team, how you work through that, how you make sure you bring the right people together to solve those problems, that I think that helps you move forward.
One of the things that you're now very much responsible and the figurehead for as a global chair is the 30% Club. Just tell us what your take is on that, because we talk about being surprised and being taken by surprise. Are you surprised there aren't more women in serious positions of power? Would you hope that there would be by 2024, we'd be in a stronger position there?
Yes, I am surprised. Look, when I was... we were talking about my 17-year-old self or my 22-year-old self entering the workplace and being somewhat agnostic to the gender topic, because I did not think that was going to be still so defining throughout my career. And I have been surprised that as I've sort of looked around the C-suite tables at the lack of women that are sitting around those tables. And on one level, we have made a lot of progress. So the 30% Club, since it was founded in 2010, we've made fantastic progress in terms of ensuring that there are now more women in non-executive roles on boards. But we still, one of the reasons I succeeded Anne Cairns in the role as chair of the 30% Club, because I feel there's still a lot more to do in the C-suite. We have less than 10% of female CEOs in the FTSE 100, in the S&P 100. That's true for CFOs and chairs as well. And I said last year when Severn Trent announced that they had appointed a female CFO, making them, I think, at the time, the first listed company that had a female CEO, chair, and chief financial officer. You sort of look at that and you think, wouldn't it be nice if that wasn't newsworthy anymore, right? That's just the way forward. I think there are lots of reasons. It's probably another whole podcast as to why we don't see enough women at sort of coming through in those senior levels. But I think we need to, we need to keep this front and center. I think it's also a business imperative, quite frankly. In the same way that you want diverse teams in sports, you want diverse teams, not just by gender, but also by socioeconomic background, ethnicity, sexual orientation, educational background around the table to get to the best, business decisions that you can make.
That's a really interesting point. Why in particular do you think diversity, not just women, but as you've just mentioned, all these other groups as well, why is that so important around a table making fundamental decisions? What does that bring to the party?
When you get into diversity of thought, people apply. We're all shaped by, I've just been sharing some of my personal journey with you, and we're all shaped by where we've come from. We bring our values and perspectives to those discussions. It's what you've learned through your education, through your family, through different experience you've had in the workplace. And as a result, when in a business you're faced with a particular problem that you're trying to solve, actually you want to have different perspectives around the table, because there might be things that I'm not seeing. You may be aware there's quite a famous sort of video that is sometimes shown about which shows the importance of perspective, where there's a couple of, you're asked to watch a basketball match, and then you're asked to describe that, and then at the end of it you're asked if you saw the gorilla going through the basketball court. And because of how the task is set up, a lot of people miss the gorilla, because you just are looking at the players, right? And I think that, to me, having watched that from time to time, and I've seen the impact on teams where you go like, oh my gosh, how did I not see that? That is actually what diversity of perspective and thought is all about. That different people see different things and will have a different approach to problem solving, which is really, we're dealing with some very complex choices and decisions we have to make, and therefore you want to draw in as much as you can.
So what, Hanneke, is your ultimate goal with the 30% Club? I mean, presumably it's sort of along the lines of it shouldn't exist at all. I mean, it should just be a given that women are in these positions in the first instance.
Well, yes, that is ultimately at the end goal, but I think it's going to take quite some time before we can say that we don't need the 30% Club anymore, or a number of the other campaigns that are out there, whether it's the Valuable 500, which represents disabled individuals, or Change the Race Ratio here in the UK, which focuses on ethnicity targets. I think it's going to take a long time before we don't need these campaigns anymore. So I think but ultimately you're absolutely right. That is the end goal.
So one thing I want to leave this on is, and you must be the doyen of performance tips, what is one thing that you would say to my audience listening or watching today with regards to performance, the one thing that you perhaps do or you wish you did more of that every single day can actually help your everyday performance, what would it be?
So sorry, there's what I wish I do and what I actually do. So every day I look ahead and I'm quite ruthless about my calendar, both, the calendar for the day as well as the week ahead and the month ahead. And I constantly ask myself and work with my fabulous assistant, or I say, okay, do I need to be in this meeting? Why am I in this meeting? Am I there to make a decision? Is it advancing the business? Is it working with some of the not-for-profits that I do? Is it there's quite a lot of events that perhaps I'm asked to attend. So you sort of go through your list of reasons why you should or shouldn't attend. And if it doesn't tick a number of boxes, then I decide to change my calendar, because you never have enough time to do everything that you need to do in these jobs. So it's back to what are absolutely the 3 things that you must complete in a day or any given week. And you need to be ruthless about going about that. A former colleague of mine sent me a little article as I started in this role, which was about calendar management. And you should approach every entry in your calendar with, I think it was something like the 4 Ds. Decide if you delete the meeting, delay it, delegate it, or diminish it. So I added a 5th, and I said, or decide to actually do the meeting, and have a positive in there as well. But you know what? It's a little trick. It helps me. It helps me enormously. And secondly, I would say, but everyone in these roles struggles with this. You must look at your week and actually figure out what you do to look after yourself. Because sometimes there just isn't enough time, but you need to, whatever that means to you, and that will be something different to different people. In my case, it's either doing some exercise or spending time with family, or maybe sitting quietly with a book. You must make the time for that, because or in my case, I find it, it gives me some rest and some new energy to deal with the challenges ahead.
Both of those are excellent tips. Hanneke, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you making the time for us in your diary today.
It was my absolute pleasure. Really pleased to be here. And this was definitely in the top 3.
Perfect. Couldn't wish for more. Thanks, Hanneke.